Hello, all of my Moscow and Central American students. I'm making these videos for you, by the way, so that your English improves. Anyway, a lot of my students are always sending me these emails. They're saying, Mr. Williams, you're not giving us enough listening comprehension homework. Well, okay. My buddy and I, Igor Shavkunov, our goal is to put like 200 stories on YouTube. And along with the stories, we're going to be putting in pronunciation and irregular verb practice. So you better not plan to go anywhere on your weekends because your Saturdays and Sundays are going to be booked, packed to the brim with English homework. You're going to be listening to English, speaking, working on pronunciation, singing songs, putting on funny hats. And it's going to take up all of your time, and by the end of the year, your English is going to be amazing. Trust me, if you put in the time, it will happen. So I'm going to tell you another story. This is kind of like a near-death experience, and it's kind of a continuation of the other story because I was in the same place. But and also it was on the kayak, and when I think all of my near-death experiences, almost all of them, they have to do with the kayak, because the kayak, it was such a delicate thing where if it just tips a little bit this way, it gets a little wobbly and water gets in, the water is freezing, and if you tip over, you're gone. And so I had so many close calls on the kayak, and this one was even bigger than the last. I'm telling this mostly for my students in the south, my FC ears from Zhulebina, where there's soon to be a metro. Also, guys, when you listen to these stories at home, I want you not only to memorize them and retell them, but when you prove a point, I want you to use your hands the way that I do. So when you prove like some kind of point, you say, BAM! Or you go, BAM! You guys understand? That's how you prove a point. And whether the listener believes you or not, they have to, because you did that. And so the story is basically for you guys, because my high schoolers last year, they liked this story so much that they made me retell it so many times. And so now I'm going to retell it for my Moscow students. I'm going to start you off, I always start you off and warm you up with a little poem, because poetry teaches you the rhythm and the imagination and the beauty of the English language. And since this near-death experience has to do with fog, I'm going to read to you one of the all-time most famous short poems about fog. Fog. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. So I want you to keep in your mind, think about fog. When's the last time you experienced a really big, dense, intense fog? In Central America, we had these cloud forests. And so these cloud forests, whenever you were hiking in them, was all just fog. But it was actually just like big, beautiful, moist clouds. And you'd be hiking up in the rainforest and everything would be wet, even though it's not raining. Very, very lush, very green. And soon the colors were so intense that it got into your dreams at night and you started to have really colorful dreams. Anyway, there was this one instance in Alaska when I experienced this fog. And it happened once and that's it. It was the most amazing thing and I couldn't understand it. And I never knew what this thing that happened to me meant until, like 3 or 4 years ago. It's the first time I finally figured out what this whole thing meant. What I'm trying to say is that things happen in our lives and they're happening right now. We have no clue, we have no idea what's going on. We don't know why this is happening. And sometimes we don't know until years later, sometimes decades later, and then 10 years later we look back, we're like, oh man, now I really understand why that happened. Because if that hadn't happened, then these things would not have taken place. But because these things took place because that certain incident in my life, that person that I met on the subway or the electrichka, or that mentor that just stormed into my life and took me and gave me just one lecture. My mentor came to me and just talked to me one time and that was it. My whole life took a different course. Instead of going there, I went there. And it all happened because of that one meeting, that one incident. And you don't really understand these things until, like I said, let 5 years go by, let 15 years go by, and then look back, and then it's amazing. It makes sense, and it all fits together like some sort of big classical symphony. And so here's what happened. I was in town because I had a meeting, and I had to kayak home. And the kayak home, like I said, it's something like 6 kilometers. It's quite far, but it's a really nice kayak because you could stay near the shore and you could hear all of the sounds coming from the woods. And so I would always stay kind of close to the shore in about 20 or 30 feet of water, and I would very slowly kayak home because at night, these night kayaks, the water was always very, very calm, and it's very quiet, and the stars were all reflected on the water, and it was kind of like the highlight of my day, night kayaking. Nothing ever bad happened, except this one time. And so, when I was walking down the dock to get into my kayak, I was like, man, this is strange. There's so much fog, and fog is just moving in like little cat's feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and moves on. And this is what it was doing. The fog was just coming at you and then surrounding you and enveloping you. That's a word I want you guys to use, to envelop. And so I was completely surrounded by this fog. And I said to myself, well, no matter what happens, I still have to get in my kayak and go home, because I can't walk home, because we were separate from the mainland. We were like on this other island. So the only way to get there was to kayak. And I can't spend the night here. I don't really know anybody. What, I'm going to knock on somebody's door? Hey, can I spend the night with you? Kaboom! No. Actually, the people in Alaska are so friendly. They would have taken me in, and they would have fed me, and I could have spent the night with any stranger. Because Alaskan people are like that. Totally down. I want you to learn the way that I use that word. If somebody's down, that means they're cool to the point that they would accept you. They're down with anything. So anyway, I said, no, I have to kayak home. Plus, I'm hungry, and I know that food is waiting for me at home because I had already prepared something, and I just need to make it home. And I know how to get home because I've done it 1,000 times. You just follow the shore. But then there's one part that's tricky. But it was never tricky because there had never been fog. But now there's all this fog. And I get in the kayak and I start slowly paddling, and I'm staying very close to the bank because that's the only way that I know where I'm going. And I know if I just follow the shore and I go straight, that will take me home. The problem is this. After you go straight and you follow the shore for about 3 kilometers, the shore comes to an end. And then it opens out into the huge, endless Pacific Ocean. And so you're not supposed to go to the left. If you go to the left, you're going out into the Pacific, and you'll find yourself in Kamchatka. Ooh. You guys know the song. That's an interesting line. This story, that line is totally going to make sense. I didn't see your ship. Wait till you hear what I have to tell you. So when you're at that channel, don't go left. If you go left, you're in the Pacific and you are a goner. That's what they say in baseball when you hit a home run. It's a goner. Well, if you go out into the Pacific, you are a goner. Never to be seen again, like a little twig floating on the huge, gigantic ocean of power. And you're a little twig. And nobody will ever find you. Because you're just out there. It would be like, I don't know. I could only compare it to being on the Moscow Metro. I've been on the Moscow Metro for 10 years, and I've never met another person that I know. Even though I know a lot of people in Moscow. It's like the chances, 1 in 13 million, you'll meet one of your friends. But out in the Pacific Ocean, it's like 1 in a trillion somebody would find you. Because you're just out there, and the kayak is so small. So the key is, don't go left. So I had to go straight, but I couldn't see anything because it was so foggy that I could barely see the front of my kayak. And I looked behind me and I couldn't see the back of my kayak. And I looked up, nothing but fog, and I was looking to the left and I couldn't even see the trees. And the trees are right where the embankment is, the shore and the trees start growing there, and I always see them, and I see through the trees. I can't even see the trees. It's all fog. I'm completely covered in fog. On my kayak, you have these two pedals. If you push to the right, the rudder is going to go, and you're going to go to the right. If you push to the left with your foot, the kayak is going to go to the left. So I just said to myself, I need to go a little bit more to the right, yet the tide is coming in, which means this is going to be pushing me in. So in this instance, you don't want to go to the left, you don't want to go to the right, because you'll totally get lost. You want to go straight. So I had to figure out, I can't see anything, I just have to feel straight. Like some people in this world can feel where's north, where's south, where's east, where's west. They can feel it. So I said to myself, I'm just going to have to feel my way home. And so I said, well, it feels like I'm going straight now. I'm going to make a run for it. And when I said I'm going to make a run for it, I mean I'm going to paddle like a crazy man until I hit the shore over there. And that would take me about, because I always paddled nonstop when I was going across this particular channel. And when I paddled nonstop, I made it to the other shore in about 20 minutes. So I said to myself, I'm going to paddle nonstop. I didn't have a watch, but I'm going to feel 20 minutes. And I always used to count my strokes up to 100. After 100 strokes, I would start counting again. I would get into a type of trance or a rhythm, and I would just keep paddling nonstop. So I said to myself, that's what I'm going to do, and that's how I'm going to get home. And so anyway, I started paddling, and I just kept going and going and going. 20 minutes went by, 30 minutes went by, I stopped paddling, and I listened. Because I said to myself, I should be at the other shore by now. I should be in my channel. There should be a house to the left, another house to the right. Also, there should be this tiny little mayak. It's a tiny little lighthouse. And I always used to use that little lighthouse to get home. And that lighthouse should be to my right. But of course, on this day, I couldn't see anything because of the fog. And so after 30 minutes, I put my paddle down. I was just listening, and I said to myself, if anything, I could hear the forest. Because there's always these animals and these sounds and these birds and eagles, screaming from the forest. So it was completely silent, completely covered by, by fog. I couldn't hear anything. And I wasn't on the other side. So I said to myself, oh man, I've done it again. I'm lost. And what do I do now? Because I don't know where is left, I don't know where right is, I don't know where south is. What do I do? I can't just sit here. It was already night. It was already very late. It was about 9, 10 o'clock at night. It's very, very late. And I said to myself, yeah, I can't stop. I just have to keep going. I have to feel again. Okay, I feel this way. I put my paddles down in the water, and I paddled for 30 more minutes. And I said to myself, why haven't I run into the land? Even if I had run into any land, I would know, go to the right, and then take a left, and I'm home. I didn't run into any land. Then I put the paddle down, and I said to myself, yeah, that's it. I'm totally, totally screwed. You guys have to learn that word. I'm totally screwed. This is all because of the fog. The fog comes on little cat's feet. And now the cat had me. And I was out there, and I finally figured out, I know where I am. I'm halfway between Alaska and Kamchatka. Which is an exaggeration, but I finally figured out something drifted me off to the left, and I am out there in the Pacific Ocean, in the black, dark water, where all of the whales are, who knows what kind of sharks, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet deep. And I'm just like floating there, and there's nothing around me but this fog, and I'm looking all around. I'm waiting for some voice from the heavens to talk to me, to say, listen, you've gone the wrong way. Go that way, you'll make it home. I waited. No voice. I didn't have time to pray. It was getting really cold, and I said to myself, I have to act now. Because if I stay out here too long, I'm going to freeze to death, and I just have to pick a direction again. This was like gambling. This was like Russian roulette. Just pick a direction and go. Anyway, the waves were getting bigger because I was out there. And I said to myself, if this kayak tips or anything, and the kayak was starting to go because the waves were hitting it, I said, oh man, that's going to be the end. And I figured something out. As an American, anyway, I'm wearing the US soccer team. Did you guys know we qualified for the World Cup? Does anybody know why? Jurgen Klinsmann taught us attacking soccer. What I wanted to say was, if I had fallen into this water, because I'm an American, I would die in about 5 minutes. For Russian people, it's different. For Russian people, you have a completely different set of rules. What am I talking about? When I lived in Crimea, there's something called Krещение. It happens on the 3rd week of January. And so I did this one time. We all walked down to the Black Sea and everybody was dressed in these like white robes. And all of these Russian believers, Orthodox believers, started dipping themselves into the Black Sea. This water was so unbelievably freezing. And they're like, well, Evan, you have to do it too. I'm like, man, I'm from Miami. We like hot, warm water. And they're like, no. This is what we do here. You do it too with us. I was like, okay. So I jumped in the water with my buddy Vitalik and Maxim. And they dunked themselves 3 times under. I dunked myself 3 times under. I thought I was going to die. The water was so cold. It might as well have been, like cutting a space out in a lake and dipping yourself down in there like Putin does on TV. Anyway, it was the strangest, it was the most, I can't say horrible because it was kind of interesting, but it was the most freezing and the most difficult, I would say, thing that I've ever done was participating in Krещение. But the Russians, unbelievable! I'm freezing my arse off, shaking and everything. And the Russians, really big Russian men with hairy chests, like the hair of a bear, and they're saying, oh, Choplinki, vadichki, sabotnyo, choplinki. I was like, why can't you just say warm water? Why do you have to say ichki, uchki, achki as suffixes? It's amazing, the Russian language. They don't say warm water. They don't say chopli vada. They say choplinki, vadichki, like little warm, little water. Big, huge, strong men. And they say choplinki, vadichki. To me, this is the most amazing thing in the world. What I'm trying to say is that if a Russian had fallen into the Alaskan water, I would only last 5 minutes, but the Russian would be like, hey man, this is cool, we're swimming, where are we swimming to? Yeah, swim to the shore. Nothing would happen. They're kind of very special people with special skin and blood. I know this by experience. Anyway, I was out there. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know which way to go. And so, instead of panicking, I realized this. All I have to do is change the way I think. I have to turn this into a type of game. And I started thinking of childhood. And I thought way back of way back when I was little, playing on the playground, how fun it was. And I had this little flashback of me on the swing, and my mother is pushing me on the swing, and the sun is out, and there's these palm trees, and I'm having like such a good time. And that was all playing out in my mind. And when I opened my eyes, all of a sudden I was really happy. I was like, man, this is really cool. It's like I'm still in a game, and this is the game, and something okay is going to happen. So just don't panic, because if you panic, you're not going to make it out of this one. So I was in a really happy mood just because of that memory, and I said, man, I have a mom. My mom loves me. Remember, she pushed me? So what am I going to do? I'm just going to paddle, but I'm not going to paddle panicky. I'm going to paddle happily. Adverb. So I started paddling, but I was really happy. Like with each paddle, I was kind of laughing. I was like, woo, this is amazing. I'm stuck in the middle of the Pacific. Perhaps I'm going to go to Russia, and they're finally going to teach me how to properly say Здравствуйте. And so I was paddling, and all of a sudden, like in some kind of science fiction dream, I run into this huge mechanism. I don't see it yet, but I see these lights. And these lights are like flashing, and I hear this sound like somebody on a microphone saying, duh, duh, duh. I was like, oh man, the Russians are here. Then I said to myself, I don't know if this is some kind of UFO or something, but think about it. I'm surrounded by fog, but outside of this fog, there's these lights that are appearing, and I'm thinking, I'm in the middle of the Pacific. What in the world is happening here? I said to myself, I'm desperate right now. I have no choices. I'm going to go towards this light. I started kayaking toward the light. Finally, I got into it, and I look up, and oh man, there's this giant ship. And as soon as I see what they're doing, I'm like, oh my gosh. Thanks be to God, it was a fishing boat. And they were pulling up these big, great king Alaskan crabs. And soon one of the fishermen saw me. He's like, "What in the world are you doing here?" I was like, "I don't know. I was going to ask you the same question. What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Oh man, we got to get the ladder." He threw the ladder down. I tied my kayak with a string to the ladder, and I climbed up, and all the fishermen, they gathered around me like I was some kind of alien that dropped out of the sky. And I was like, "No, I speak English." "You?" I was like, "Yeah, these guys were Alaskan fishermen." I thought they were going to start speaking Russian. If they had spoken Russian to me, at the time I didn't speak one word of Russian, I would have thought that they were aliens. They're like, "Что ты делаешь здесь?" I was like, "Oh, he's from Jupiter." So anyway, I got up there and they were all asking me, like, "What are you doing here so late at night on a kayak?" I was like, "Well, look at the fog. I can't see anything. Like, where are you coming from?" I'm like, "From the south side of Thorn Bay." I'm like, "Oh my gosh. Like, do you know how far you just paddled?" I was like, "I don't know." I just kept paddling. And they're like, "We are way offshore. And we're the only ship here for literally hundreds of miles around. In fact," they said, "we never really fished this hole. But we're fishing it today just to try a new hole. And it's very good because we have lots of crabs." And they started telling me, I was like, "Well, look guys, I need to get back into Thorn Bay. Do you guys have a dinghy?" You guys have to learn this word, dinghy. I was like, "Do you have a dinghy and you could take me back in?" And a dinghy is like a little boat with a little Evinrude motor, and they could tow you back in. One of the fishermen said, "Yeah, we're going to stop working about 45 minutes, and I'll take you back into the shore." So I said, "Oh man, saved my life." The fisherman went down, we got into the dinghy, we tied up my kayak. This is the second time this has happened. And he drove me, and the drive was so long, even on a motorboat. We just kept driving and driving and driving. And finally, he had a compass, so he knew where to go. And we got into the Thorn Bay, and I got into the leg. After that, the boat couldn't go any further because I lived in a place that was very shallow water, so we untied the kayak, I got back in. I told the man, "Thank you." We exchanged like emails, and then I took off and I went back home. I wrote him this huge email. I was like, "Man, you saved my life." And anyway, it was only 10 years later that I actually understood what this story meant, like what the whole thing meant. And I'm thinking metaphorically, it's something like this. When I see somebody, not even when I see somebody, I myself, or when I see somebody that has kind of lost their way in life, they've stepped onto the wrong track. And I know this because I've done this, not just many times, but I've done this for years at a time. For years at a time, I've been totally lost. Or if I see somebody, like one of my friends or my brother, that's totally lost, I'm thinking, basically, we're surrounded by fog. We're in the fog, and we can't see. And only somebody that can see can actually kind of take us out of the fog. But unless that happens, we're in the fog and we can't see, and we're totally, totally lost. And when we're in the fog, nothing good happens. When you're just in the fog, you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and you're just floating around, and you're awaiting your death. And the only way to escape from this, what I learned, is by just changing the way that you think. And I realized that when I was out there, I could have lived or I could have died. I would have died if I hadn't changed the way that I thought. So I started thinking these really amazing and these happy thoughts, even though death could have been there like that. So I kind of tricked myself, and I started thinking about these things. And because I started thinking about these really happy memories, every stroke and every paddle that I took was kind of a happy paddle. I was just kind of laughing like a madman with each paddle. And because I made that attitude, and I was just playing it out, it was only because of that I ran into this boat. Otherwise, I never would have run into the boat, and I would have died in this panic. And so when you're a little bit lost in life, or you've stepped off course, or you've been trying the same things over and over and over again, or you're going through one relationship after another relationship. This happened to me. I went into one relationship, then I tried another, then I tried another. After 3 or 4 years, I'm thinking, my gosh, nothing is working. Why is this? It's because I'm in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and I'm surrounded by fog, and I haven't yet changed the way that I think. It was only one morning, simultaneously, I can say instantaneously, when I woke up and I said, yeah, I'm not going to think this way anymore. And I'm not going to think that way anymore. I'm going to totally change the way that I think, and I'm going to see what it brings me. And it was only when I started to do that when I started surrounding myself, or people were coming to me and I were coming to them, and finally I was surrounding myself with a community of friends that were just taking me higher and higher and to better places. And that only happened when I changed my thinking. Before, when my thinking was still, I could say, unregenerate, I was surrounded by people that were just kind of pulling me down and dragging me down, and everything that I was doing was a failure and nothing worked. It was only when I changed my thoughts, when things started to work and things started to make sense. And that happened to me out on the water in the Pacific Ocean in Alaska. I was paddling and I said, I'm just going to change, and I ran into the ship. And the chances of running into that ship are about the same chances of meeting a person you know without arranging anything in the Moscow metro. It's kind of like a 1 in 10 million chance. It's never happened to me. Maybe it's happened to some of you. But the chances of running into a ship out there is like 1 in a trillion. It's like a tiny little cork just running into something else in this ocean that just goes on forever and ever. Anyway, that was another near-death experience. I'm sorry it dragged on so long. I try to keep my stories short, like in 10 minutes, but I'm telling these just very spontaneously without any notes. I hope you enjoyed, and I'm going to try to make a story every couple of days or when I have time. So I hope you enjoy them. I hope they help your listening comprehension skills, and I look forward to telling you the next one. Thanks for listening.